Welcome to episode 12 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. I'm your host, Marc Spagnuolo, and today we're going to have a quick review of clamps. Now, I get a lot of questions about what types of clamps to buy, and as a lot of you already know, the variety of clamps out there is just staggering. You got your spring clamps, your C-clamps, your quick clamps, your pipe clamps, your parallel clamps, and your F-style clamps. It's no wonder people are confused, and I haven't even mentioned any of the specialized clamps. Like many woodworkers, I spent a lot of money on clamps that I didn't really need before I knew any better. Or I bought ones that weren't adequate for my purposes and had to rebuy better clamps later. So my hope is that by reviewing my clamps, showing you what I own and showing you how they work, that you might be better prepared when it comes to selecting clamps for your own shop. And we're going to cover a bunch of tips, tricks, and clamping strategies along the way. And if you're interested in any of the products that I show you today, make sure you check out the Wood Whisperer store because I have links for all of these products there. So let's start with a look at some more traditional clamps. Here are a couple of C-clamps. Now, when I first started woodworking, I stocked up on these because they were affordable. Plus, they were the type of clamp that I thought of when I heard the word clamp, so I figured, hey, why not stock up? It was a big mistake. I rarely, if ever, use them, and they wound up being sold at a yard sale. So I still keep a few around. You just never really know when you're going to need something like that, but I hardly ever have a need for them. So I recommend keeping a few on hand, but don't go overboard. You only need a couple. Now this is a traditional wood screw clamp. I keep these around simply because they look so woodworky. I mean, what kind of woodworking shop doesn't have cool looking wooden clamps? But soon after I bought mine off of eBay, I realized that they actually come in pretty handy. They exert an incredible amount of pressure and are very useful when trying to clamp tapered surfaces. And one of the best uses that I found for them is holding pieces upright. It's especially helpful if you're assembling a large bookcase or a cabinet. And since they're made of wood, they're not going to mar the surfaces of your workpieces. Next up are these little spring clamps. Now these come in handy for small projects or gluing down small parts. One of the best uses that I've found for them is repairs. If I'm replacing a piece of wood that chipped out or maybe a little bit of a veneer that's lifted up, these little guys can hold the piece in place until the glue dries. But like C-clamps, I really only need to have a few of them in the shop. So now let's talk about F-style clamps. Now, these are one of the most common clamps out there. They exert a good amount of pressure, they're durable, and they come in every length you can imagine. Now, I have a reasonable selection of the shorter F-style clamps starting at the 6-inch and not really getting any longer than 12. I prefer to use a different type of clamp for anything longer than 12 inches, and we'll cover that in a bit. Now the two sizes that I use the most are these little 6-inch guys and these big honkin' 12-inch deep throat models. Now the small ones are great for clamping across a joint, like a tabletop. Their low profile allows me to get the clamp under the board and then make sure that they're perfectly even. Now I keep about 8 of these on hand, and honestly, I'd like to have 8 more. Now these big guys, these are awesome. The long throat allows me to reach areas that normally I wouldn't even be able to touch with a normal clamp. And they're so well built, they're so heavy duty that they exert more pressure than pretty much any clamp that I've got on my wall. Now one of the most basic and inexpensive clamps out there is the traditional pipe clamp. Now you can get all different lengths of pipe from the big box stores in 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch diameters. And the end of the pipes themselves are threaded, and it's matched perfectly to these fixtures that you can buy. Now the fixtures usually run about $10, some are a little bit pricier, and they're exceptionally strong. Now if there's any real downside to them, it's the fact that they have a pretty short throat depth, meaning that the distance between the bar and the top of the jaw is pretty short. And if you're trying to get a good amount of pressure distributed over a taller space, it might not be the right clamp for the job. But if you need an 8-foot clamp in a hurry, this is by far the cheapest way to go. You can even pick up a few smaller pieces and buy the little unions, link them together, and get as long of a bar as you need. Oh, and one other thing, just be careful when you use these clamps during a glue up. These bars can leave pretty nasty stains on wood. All it takes is a little drop of glue between the bar and your workpiece and whammo, you got yourself a nice black stain. This is especially true when you're using oak, which I'm guessing is probably due to the high levels of tannic acid in the wood. So be sure to put down some wax paper or some other material to block the glue and avoid that nasty black stain. Now let's take a minute to talk about quick clamps. The most common one that I've seen around is the Quick Grip series by Irwin. Now I've had these for a few years and they come in real handy, just holding stop blocks and other light duty workshop tasks, but I've never really used them for serious clamping. What you gain in convenience, you sort of lose in clamping pressure. But Irwin recently improved their old formula and came out with a new one. It's called the Irwin Quick Grip XP. And let me tell you, there is a night and day difference between the old ones and the XP. The labeling says it's twice the pressure, but honestly, it feels like it's more than that. The body's more substantial, the bar is meatier, and the clamping action is very satisfying. And what I mean by that is on some clamps, you start cranking them down, and then all of a sudden you hit a wall, and you just can't clamp it anymore. But then there's other clamps out there that slowly approach the wall, and you get a real good sense of how much pressure you're applying with each turn, or in this case, with a squeeze. And at the point when you feel that there's enough pressure, the glue joint is nice and tight, you realize that you could actually tighten it up even more if you wanted to. And that's what I mean by satisfying. That's a major improvement over the old ones. And I'll tell you, these guys are actually finding their way into more and more projects every day. Now, I just need to get a few different sizes and I'll be set. Now, the last type of clamp that I want to discuss is the parallel clamp. Now, a parallel clamp is basically just a modified bar clamp that's got a nice, rigid, square throat that helps keep your work aligned while clamping. Now, these are my go-to clamps for almost every single project, and if you stock up on anything, make it these guys. Now, they can be pricey, but there's usually a few big sales a year at either Amazon or Rockler, and that's the time to stock up. Now, if you frequent some of the forums, you won't be able to miss the sale because someone always announces it. If you start looking around, you'll soon find that there are 3 primary competitors in this market: Jorgensen, Bessey, and Jet. So which one should you buy? Now, price-wise, it's usually a toss-up. Sometimes I see the Jets listed as the cheapest, and sometimes the Jorgensens, sometimes the Besseys. But in reality, if you wait for a big sale, it just really doesn't matter. So the real question is, do any of these clamps have something that the others don't? Now, the Besseys and the Jorgies, they're pretty comparable. They're both quality products. There may be a slight difference or two, but nothing really worth noting. And for the longest time, those were the only 2 options. But not too long ago, Jet stepped into the market. And now the Jets have several notable features that, in my opinion, make it the best option out there. First, they've got measurements right here on the bar. Now, at first I saw it and I thought, wow, that's great. What the hell am I going to do with that? But then I realized that in certain glue-ups, if you're trying to get all of your clamps open to the same amount, so while the glue's drying, you can quickly just throw the clamps on the project and you're good to go, these numbers really come in handy. Another feature is this quick release lever. Now, I don't know how many times in the middle of a glue-up, I'm trying to open up a clamp and I've got it stuck, wiggling the thing around and shaking it and it's not budging. This quick release lever actually makes that problem go away. And one other feature, which is pretty cool, but I'll probably never use it, is the ability to anchor the clamp into a bench using the bench dogs that come with it. Now, they simply screw into the clamp on the bottom here and then drop down into the holes on your bench. It basically just holds the piece in position, which is pretty cool for some applications. Now, another important feature of the Jets is the size of the clamping head. You can actually see the difference between this Bessey and the Jet. It's probably, I would say, I don't know, a good 20% larger than the Bessey, and that's pretty significant for clamping. Now, the last thing, which is a minor detail, but a major improvement, is the handle. Now, you can get a serious grip on this thing and really crank it down if you want to. In fact, there's times when I could tell that I could actually break the board quite easily if I crank down hard enough. Again, that's that satisfying feeling that I mentioned earlier. Now, the Besseys and Jorgies, they've got a simple cylindrical wooden handle that it kind of tends to slip in your hand when you really crank down. Now, I'm not saying throw out all of your old Besseys and Jorgies, far from it. I know some of you guys have some pretty impressive collections, but if you're buying some new clamps, or if you're just starting out, do yourself a favor and take a look at these Jets. So the question comes up all the time, how many clamps should I buy? Well, it's like they say, you can never have enough. But let me qualify that. You can never have enough of the right type. Now, I've got enough C-clamps and spring clamps, but I can always use more parallel clamps and F-style clamps. At least for me, the ones that I typically need a lot are the small F-clamps and the deep throat F-clamps, as well as the smallest parallel clamps. So those are the ones that I recommend stocking up on. Now, in general, I use my parallel clamps far more than any other style clamp in the shop. And I absolutely recommend building up your collection over the course of a few years. It's kind of funny because people come into the shop and they think the clamp wall just looks ridiculous. They seem to have a look on their face that says, when are you ever going to need that many clamps? But I can tell you numerous times when the wall was quickly emptied by a single project. Now, having all those clamps on hand ensures that you're going to clamp properly and your work is going to improve as a result of it. Now, if you're always scrounging for clamps and trying to figure out ways to rig up a clamping strategy, your work is going to suffer. Now, if you're really not sure what your needs are going to be, you just can't beat a starter kit. Now, I've got two in the Wood Whisperers store that I recommend. One's from Irwin and the other's from Bessey. They include a pipe clamp fixture, a couple F-style clamps, and a few other things that'll help you jumpstart your collection. And once you start using them, then you'll quickly realize what you need more of and what you could live without. Now, once you have all this money invested in these clamps, it's extremely important to protect your investment. This means protecting your clamps from glue. Now, you can use things like wax paper or newspaper or even plastic wrap to protect your clamps during glue-ups. But honestly, that's just too much work for me, so what I like to do is wax the clamps so that any dried glue will scrape off relatively easily. Now, what do you do if you already have glue on your clamps? Well, there's no magic fix, unfortunately. Prevention really is the key. But there are two methods that I know of that get the job done. One is simply scraping off the glue. Now, this works fine on the sides of the bar, but can be tricky on the rib part of the bar. And those ribs are there for a reason, so I really don't like scraping across them. So if you have a heat gun or a small torch, you can heat the glue up and actually soften it to easily scrape it off of the surface. Now, the second method involves the use of a brass wire wheel hooked up to a drill. Now, the brass will not do any damage to the bar itself, but it'll do a fine job of knocking off the glue. And when your clamps are all nice and clean again, make sure you wax them. You don't want to have to do this heavy-duty cleaning more than once a year if necessary. And once you have a nice, clean set of clamps, you need a good way to store them. Now, I've seen some pretty incredible storage systems posted on the forums. Mine is actually pretty simple. The main rack is made from 2x2s and poplar, and it works great for most of my clamps. My parallel clamp rack is made from plywood and has slots cut out in the top for each clamp to actually slide into, and that's easy enough to make that on the bandsaw. So as you can see, clamps all pretty much do the same thing. They just do it in different ways. Now, it's important for you to determine which clamps work best for your style of woodworking. Once you do that, all that's left to do is stock up. Now remember, many of the items featured in this and every podcast can be found in the Wood Whisperer store. So if you need some clamps and you want to help out the show, the Wood Whisperer store is a great way to do both. And just as an FYI, you might notice a little bit more time passing in between the videos over the next few weeks. I've got a number of commissions coming due and they're all happening at the same time as our shop upgrades, so things are going to be a little crazy for a while. But if you're jonesing for the Spagnuolo, which I completely understand, feel free to check out the newly installed webcam on the website. We're still ironing out the details, but you should be able to get a peek into the workshop every day. So until next time, happy woodworking.